Well, let's go to, I think, Annie, you're up next. You there, Annie?
I'm here. Hi.
All right. Let's talk about the summer wind, the Frank Sinatra song. Let's talk about let's talk about wind.
Let's talk about wind. Okay, so as I think it's no surprise to anybody, everyone's heard by now that this administration has announced this the other 30 by 30 initiative, and the one we spoke about that affects the seafood industry, which is to get 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by the year 2030. And this is becoming a huge cornerstone of the administration's renewable energy policies, climate change mitigation strategies, and all of that. So far, we have 16 leased areas in U.S. waters for offshore wind that together are almost 3,000 square miles. They're primarily in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic for the existing lease areas. But
that's just in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, because right, you're talking about just that one region of the country.
That's right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think that number includes, there's a renewable energy, a wave energy project off of Oregon, and that's included in there, but that's only a few miles. So okay. Yes, but yes, for offshore wind, right now the leases are off of New England and the Mid-Atlantic. But there are additional call areas, and the call area is sort of the pre-leasing phase for offshore wind. So there's 2 large call areas off of Oahu, and there's 3 off California. There's more expected very soon off of Oregon. The Gulf of Mexico is now looking to create call areas to move forward with offshore wind. We're expecting to see a lot of activity off of Washington State in the near future, as well as additional leases in the Gulf of Maine. And then there are 8 additional proposed leases in the New York Bight right now. And that's in addition to the 3,000 square miles and the 16 existing leases.
And just remind me again, how many offshore wind farms we had prior to this, past couple of months?
So we have 7 turbines currently in U.S. waters. 5 are in state waters off of Rhode Island, or in Rhode Island rather, and we have 2 monopile turbines off of Virginia in federal waters.
So this is going to multiply. If all of these projects went forward and got the green light and were, constructed, this is going to probably 100 times what we have now?
It should be simple math. So yeah, that sounds like, for federal waters, that sounds like 1,500 times just for the existing leases. Wow. And yes, and then more with the call areas, maybe double that again. It's a lot. And so this really is sort of going from 0 to 100. Some of the existing leases have been in play for about 10 years now. And we just saw the administration give the final approval to the first commercial scale offshore wind project off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And now it's, every week we're seeing a new construction operations plan, a new comment period on, proposed projects or new lease areas. It is a lot. It is very, very hard to keep track of.
We were talking last year with the Trump administration and what was happening, and there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of angst. But it seems like from day one of the inauguration, maybe day 2, somewhere in that ballpark, this administration has just been on full crank in getting these things pushed forward. It must be a dizzying pace for you to keep up with, and it's every coast. It's not just the North Atlantic. It's the whole Eastern Seaboard, correct? And the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast.
Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. Yes, it's everywhere.
Talk a little bit about what commercial harvesters, what are their reservations about wind turbines? What are they worried about?
Sure. So it depends on a lot of things. I mean, it depends on the fishing operations in question in a particular area. And, there's this sort of fundamental question of compatibility between offshore wind and fisheries. To our knowledge, I have not heard of anywhere in the world that anybody operates mobile gear within an offshore wind array. And people will claim different reasons for that, but in any case, we know that it's really not happening. And so can it happen? It looks very unlikely. And that's with fixed turbine foundations. Now, off of California, Oregon, Washington, Maine, and other places, they're looking at floating wind foundations, which are tethered with a large number of cables that move through the water column, right? So you can imagine that it would be even more challenging to think about in that floating wind array to operate, in particular, mobile gear. But then with static gear, there's other considerations, right? We do know that there are some instances in the UK and elsewhere where people are fishing with pot and trap gear within wind arrays. Again, but in certain conditions, there are obviously safety considerations to having all of this infrastructure in the water. There's a lot of questions about the environmental interactions. You're introducing a lot of new material and substrate to the marine environment. And now, on the one hand, all we ever hear about is, oh, that's going to create artificial reefs, and that's a great thing. But it's really not that simple when you look at it from a scientific perspective, right? It depends what region you're in. It depends what, what species are already there, what are going to be attracted to it. And it's not just the structure, right? It's noise, it's electromagnetic fields, it's vibrations, it's a whole lot of things. And there really is not a whole lot of scientific information right now that shows both with the particular ecoregions that we have in the US and sort of on the site-specific level, but also when you start to look at the population level from the fisheries perspective, as well as the ecosystem level, oceanographic processes, how all of those will be impacted by putting this much new structure in the water in this short of a time frame.
Wow. So, I mean, this administration has expressed concerns about climate change, which I think everybody has got some concern about. They're looking for alternative energy sources. They have a lot of the population of the country probably supports offshore wind. Do you feel like at this point, the way things have been happening so quickly and rapidly and dramatically, do you feel like commercial harvesters are kind of up against it at this point? I mean, what's the best thing you can hope for?
Yeah, I wish I could be as optimistic as Leigh was opening this panel. I don't think there's a ton of optimism in the commercial industry right now with regard to offshore wind. Certainly, when we're looking at this level of proposed development, when we're looking at the players involved, this is not your mom and pop sort of windmill manufacturer in your backyard. These are large multinational companies, right? And in a lot of cases, they're large oil and gas companies working off of their renewables portfolio, and investment firms and hedge funds. I mean, there's just billions and billions of dollars in this industry. And unfortunately, because it does look like a sort of ready to go solution for climate change to this administration. Let's put them offshore. We can have all of these benefits, for climate change. And there aren't going to be too many people opposed to this sort of industrialization and the structure because it's out of sight, out of mind for most Americans. And so this is where we really see the situation where the fishing industry is the one coming up saying, hey, wait a minute here. Yes, absolutely, climate change is important and we want to do something about it and we want to play our part to do something about it. But to do all of this all at once is sort of the one thing and the main thing to go all in on may lead certainly to unintended consequences, but in some cases, consequences that are pretty predictable right now. And we could be doing a much better job of managing those and mitigating those up front.
Have you guys been able to look, I mean, offshore wind's been done in other places, right? Have you been able to look at what's happened in those other places with commercial fishing?
Sure. So yeah, we spend a lot of time with RODA talking to colleagues in Europe, in the UK and in continental Europe, both in the fishing industry and in the scientific community. There's a lot of ways in which I think we can look at and see some parallels and get some lessons learned. There's a lot of ways in which we can't. The fisheries are very different out there. So in continental Europe, fishermen are not allowed to operate in the wind arrays. It's just regulatory reasons. They're just not allowed to, for the most part. In the UK, people do have the authority, right, to fish in the wind arrays, but that's where we're seeing that's really largely mobile gear fisheries and fixed gear fisheries. In a lot of cases, those are smaller fleets that tend to stay closer to their home port. They're not as they don't have the sort of distant fleets that we have here. And also, again, when you're looking at things like impacts to certain fish stocks, it's going to be very location specific. We have been doing a lot of, particularly scientific collaboration with colleagues in Europe, and that's getting to be more and more. They're flagging also that they do not have a lot of sort of peer-reviewed science and information. The European Parliament recently came out with a report that there is almost a complete absence of information about the socioeconomic impacts of offshore wind to fisheries. And so certainly we're trying to get a lot better information about that. And so the science is important, but also, for fishermen to be involved in the projects, to be paying attention, to bring their concerns early and upfront is super important. In a lot of cases, they're doing that. But moving from a planning process right now that puts fishermen always in the defensive and puts the fishing industry in a position where they have to answer for themselves and react to plans is really not effective. We'd really like to see this moving toward a co-management or a co-planning process like we see for fisheries management, frankly, and a lot of other things that happen in the ocean space.
Okay. So I think the most recent project that was making progress was in the Gulf. Wasn't that the most recent development?
The last week, there was a Gulf of Mexico task force meeting. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Are we looking for more announcements like the ones we've seen?
Yeah, there'll be more. So just yesterday, the Empire Wind Project in New York Bight released its construction and operations plan. That was the latest announcement from BOEM. Today, BOEM announced a California task force meeting. Every day, somewhere in the country, there's another big planning meeting or a big project under review. And, they typically have 30, 45-day comment periods. And it's absolutely impossible for the industry and for people that are impacted by multiple projects, much less on a policy perspective, to actually stay engaged and figure out, what they can do to have an impact on this.
Wow. All right. Well, Annie, thank you for that. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover? I think.
I don't think so. That's a lot, sort of the size of the bill. And we're here as a resource. I think this is really overwhelming to everybody in the country. But we definitely, I would say, as an industry, need to be doing a much better job of working through legislation, through policy, and trying to change this, because the cat's definitely. The horse is out of the barn, as it were. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good.